right, so we're going to get started in just a moment. And for those of you who have attended these webinars before, you're probably familiar with our faces. I'm just going to go quickly around so that we can all introduce ourselves. My name is Dea Ore. I am one of the authors and founders of Empowering Writers, and I'm joined by some of my terrific team members. And let's start with you, Kath.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Howell. I'm coming to you from Texas, and I am the Texas Training Coordinator for Empowering Writers. Welcome.
Thanks. Di?
Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Lazar. I'm in the frozen north in Connecticut, and I'm the Director of Training and Education. I've been with Empowering Writers for about 18 years now, so long time.
And I'm Jennifer Keaton, and I am also in Texas and am the Director of Learning and Development.
Great, thanks. So we thought that this week we have been presenting these webinars and really sort of driving our conversations based on topics that we know teachers want to hear about or things that are timely for what's happening in our classroom. So we thought what we would do this week is we would really open up the floor to all of you. And it'd also be a time for us to really share some of our own teaching experiences. And we welcome you to jump into the conversation. So you don't need to be shy. And don't hold back. And if you have specific questions, we'd love to have you join us. We have a group that's pretty manageable here, so we could you could chat the questions in. We might ask you to unmute yourself so that we can have more of a conversation. So let's just talk about a couple of things that I want to really share with you, really about the writing journey. And before we actually dive into it, because I'm going to share my personal experience with you, I'm going to ask Di if she would run a poll. And the poll really is, if you just put that up there, Di, and tell them the poll question.
So the poll question is this: how many of you had to take a course on how to teach writing in order to get your original teaching certification? It's either a yes or a no. All right, looks like everyone has answered for the most part. If you were on a Chromebook, you probably couldn't answer. So really interesting, huh, Day?
Yeah, so and really not so for those of you, I don't think you can see the results, but 93% of you did not have to take a course on how to teach writing. And I'm going to say something that's even more surprising. That is not surprising. Having done this for the last 25 years, all the teachers that we've spoken to, it is rare that that teachers are required to take a course on how to teach writing. And yet it is a complicated learning process. It is highly linked to reading success. And we have to do this with our students, and yet none of us get any training on how to do it. And I love to start out that way because for many of us, writing is hard. And so we say, I'm going to stop sharing that. So let's go a step further. Let's just talk about our objectives, and I'm going to show you it. I want to show you one of my student pieces and really how this all sort of came to be. So we're happy to answer any of your questions that you have today. So feel free to put those in there. We're going to provide some instructional tips based on frequently asked questions that we know teachers ask us often. So we're going to sort of anticipate those are the kinds of things that you are wondering and you may not be asking right away. And we're going to show you some implementation strategies that lead to the transformative change. And so what does that even mean? And let me show you my student piece. This is one of our students when I was a first-year teacher, and we were required to give a baseline writing prompt, right, to assess where we were. At the time, I was in second grade. So this was a September piece, baseline piece. And my student's name here is Ben. I've lied to my grandma and milked the cow, and boom, I was scared. I found what it was making the noise. P-U-P-U. The cow farted. And that was his baseline piece. Now, while it's entertaining, because I always say that that's entertaining for an audience of others, as all good narratives are, what was really, to me, which was really difficult was I had my first year in the classroom, I had 28 kids. That was not atypical. In fact, that was typical for the baseline piece. And so from there, what I'm supposed to do is assess what the student needs and start teaching some writing strategies. And what made that so challenging was, one, that I did not come equipped. The only thing I could tell you really for sure was whether it was a good piece of writing or a weak piece of writing. But my ability to get my kids from a weak piece to a strong piece was non-existent. And I didn't know that. I actually didn't know enough to know that I was not able to really, what I would call, move the needle. I looked at student writing, and this was very typical of what all of my kids were writing. And I thought, now what do I need to do? How am I going to make a difference? And my first year in the classroom, my partner in Empowering Writers at the time was my mentor. Empowering Writers hadn't been formed yet. I had gone to her and as a first year teacher, said to her, I don't even know what to say. I don't even have any feedback. My feedback consisted of, could you give me more details? Could you write a little more? And beyond that, I didn't really know how to help. So and by the way, I'm just going to throw this caveat in because I saw somebody was talking about using they use Lucy Calkins. The other part about it was I had 28 kids that I was supposed to conference with in some kind of meaningful way, right? Can you imagine what that looks like with a bunch of 8-year-olds? So I have all these kids who want to meet with me and have a conference, and I really don't have a lot of great feedback to move anybody along, and they're all over the place. So this was really the start of a conversation. And what happened was this: when I went to my grade level partner and my mentor and confessed how little I knew about what to do about this is what her answer was. She understood completely how difficult it was teaching writing. And she also struggled with the same thing. And I thought, well, wait a minute. You're a veteran teacher. You've been here for a long time. How can you and I be having the same exact experience? And then what we found was we all were experiencing the same thing. So all of us as teachers of writing were working really hard. We were all doing our own thing. We were all using our own language. And then we'd mix these kids up and send them on to the next year. And that is not a formula for sustainable growth. Not only that, the majority of us as teachers felt incompetent in teaching writing. We didn't feel like we knew how to do it well. So I share with you Ben's sample because I'm going to share with you how Ben grew over time. So how did this happen? Well, once we realized that we had no common language, no assured experiences, the next thing that all of you that are familiar with who use Empowering Writers is a methodology. And this is why this is the core of our instruction. This is why all of our instruction gets filtered through the methodology, because it is all about common language, assured experiences. So I can say my entire class had direct instruction on how to write an entertaining beginning. I can say that I modeled that for my students in a way that I built vocabulary. I taught them transition words. They heard the thought process of the author. So every single skill that I teach my students gets filtered through this methodology. Introduced and defined through literature examples. There is no connecting reading and writing. They go hand in hand. You want to save time in your classroom, you make sure that that particular part of it, every time you teach a skill in reading or a skill in writing, that you revisit it in reading. Oh, look at how the author started this story. Then you're going to model that skill. That's the hardest part, because now I have to stand in front of my students as the authors, and that's something that we all grow into. We start mechanically at first as we learn the process until we feel really comfortable with it. The next is guided practice and peer conferencing. Guided practice and peer conferencing is successful because we are speaking the same language. That's why it works. That's how it works, is I can actually go now around the room and talk to my students and talk about guided practice and give them feedback because we have the same language. And then over time, you're going to have application. Now I want to show you the next piece. And this is the same exact student, Ben, in January. And for those of you who teach at this time in the school year, we were teaching narrative writing. The students were actually given a prompt. And this prompt was: the oldest house in town is on your street. You go inside and investigate. Tell what you find and what happens next. Now, when I originally looked at Ben's paper and everybody else who wrote like Ben, I thought that, oh my goodness, I have to do something very different to make this a successful piece. And that's not what happened. What happened was We created the methodology, whole class instruction, skill by skill, and this is what Ben produced in January. I slowly walked inside the oldest house in town. It smelled like coffins in this house. The black paint was chipped. I saw some scattered frames on the staircase. I saw some rotten cheese lying on the ground. I wondered if rats live in this house. I think I'll investigate. I came to a pile of bones and they all came together, and a skeleton came out of the bones. He chased me and chased me. I saw his hands coming at me. I heard clacking sounds. I finally slammed the door. Now I wish I never went into that house. So if I was to go back and look at that skill by skill, what I would realize is that what Ben has been doing is all of those skills that were taught first in isolation, he was now adding them to his paper. So what I want you to think about through methodology, through direct instruction, what we're doing is we're creating the teacher's toolbox, which in turn is giving the students the tools they need to be able to write well. The part that you can't see here, because I'm just showing you his paper, is the conversations that I can have with Ben as a result of him having common language and shared experiences, of him being able to understand those aspects of it. So the reason why I want to stop, we want to start here with so many of you teachers now is really because the bottom line is I can tell you this works, but what we recognize is when we see success in student writing, then we know that we're going in the right direction. And while this is just January of second grade, you can see that he's made some really great strides based on having that direct instruction. Any comments or thoughts on that? And then you'll notice that we brought right up here is the rubric. And again, this is really important because now I can speak to my students really specifically about areas of growth because we have a rubric. We actually have a rubric in two ways. One, we have holistic, taking the whole piece in, and the other, we have it skill by skill. And in skill by skill, I can take each skill and actually rate that skill. How is that student doing on it? And I can start to see levels of growth in certain areas before the student grows in the entire goal piece, if that makes sense. So this student is always going to be growing in one area or the other. Eventually, what's going to happen? He's going to meet goal on a regular basis. But initially, I can start to see what skills he's applying. Questions or comments on that? So we're going to just take a look at it. I'm going to ask Jennifer. Jen, if you don't mind, would you just jump in and share this next student sample?
I can do that. This is a piece that we have from a student on camping. And as you begin to look at this piece, what you notice is that we have the organization that we are commonly looking for. As we coach during this time of the year, and some of you may have the benefit of having that coaching from us, we oftentimes will come into a school and look at student samples and really identify what skills do the students have by this time of the year and where are they headed. So one of those non-negotiable areas as students begin to really conquer that rubric are that they are going to have an organized piece. And at first glance, we look at this piece, we see the paragraphs, and we know that there's some sense of organization. We can read through the introduction and the conclusion. Again, it does begin by introducing the topic. It does close out on the topic. The topic is all the way through. Each paragraph in itself is pretty well tied to a main idea, even though the language of the main idea sentences and maybe one or two of the details may overlap. But I would say that as teachers begin to say, oh, it's that time of year, what are we looking for? What do we do? When you get a paper like this, that's exactly how we would begin diving into it. The other thing that we always go through is, how do you pull out a summarizing framework? So that shouldn't be anything that's language that's not used at this time. So we might call it a pre-writing plan. You've been summarizing with your kids all through the year, summarizing those pieces, whether they're exemplars and empowering writers, or you've bridged that over to your reading program. But that is definitely something that's a part of structure. And while I'm doing that with this student sample, I really want to step over to Susan's comment about the Lucy Calkins and the units of study and having a devotion to that, because as we're talking about the structure of this camping piece, that's one area that's sometimes we do have teachers that come to us and say, we do use Writer's Workshop, we do use Calkins materials, and there are some really valuable lessons in there, but my kids are missing the structure that you're talking about. And so in comparison, that's kind of what we look at in terms of being organized and then having that opportunity to grow in those skills. And so, Susan, if you have students that have this kind of structure and they are ready to release from that mini lesson so that you can work on them one by one, then you would go through this student sample just like we're going to do here in those mini lessons. Without this foundation, that's where that empowering writers piece comes in, to do that annotation and analysis and really set up the skill for organizing their ideas, their brainstorm, their detail, and then putting that into a plan that's going to basically pump out like this one did. So I'm going to read just a minute. Yes, the two, there's no need for competition. The two work hand in hand. They do have strengths in each of those areas, but you will find in order to teach these foundational skills, it does take a little bit of time in order to get kids to get to this point so you can confer with them. So with this particular student sample, I am going to read through it, listen for those skills of an opinion piece, the structure of that pillar. It says, camping in the mountains is fun. We will bring good things, see a lot of awesome stuff, and we will be very busy with fun things to do. Some things you will bring is s'mores, hobos, shish kebabs, and you will drink plenty of water. My favorite thing to eat before we go hiking and look at birds and other animals is chocolate chip homemade pancakes and waffles to get you to make your own. And you can see this paragraph, we would be able to step back in one of those conferences and say, yes, that's all about what? Food. Okay, that's their author's first main idea. The next paragraph, you will see awesome stuff like many different animals, trees, and waterfalls. You will also hear birds, wind, animals, insects on a hike. When in the mountains, you will also taste good food, touch plants, animals, and air. So here we have those nature descriptions. And then in that next paragraph, we will have a lot of fun things planned for the trip. Our schedule is full. Monday and Tuesday, it's hiking and ropes course. Wednesday and Thursday is canoeing and swimming. Friday is the day we go home. So here are activities for camping. If you bring good things, awesome stuff, and plan fun things on your schedule, you will see that camping in the mountains is fun and awesome. So there's that conclusion, that wrap up. Again, these are the indicators that as you read through the papers, it does not take us long to identify those skills that we see. What we know is that we don't have much specificity in a lead, the main idea sentences, or the extension of the details by using the detail generating questions. You'll notice that we do directly align here with all of those skills. Kathy, if you can advance one more time, where you can see how each of these do connect to the student toolbox for us to be able to take those rubric areas and go back and talk to the student using that common language. The informational pillar is evident here. Now let's think about your main ideas. Did you state those specifically, just like we've talked about in that pick, list, choose, so that you can come come up with that summarizing framework. We do this when we're reading, when we're summarizing, we always see that the blurbs are very, very specific. The main reasons, perhaps we could offer some sentence starters. We've worked heavily on flip the sentence and word reference. We would reference our details using detail generating questions. What does it look like and why is it important? If we want to power those up, we know we go to our golden bricks, our quotes, statistics, amazing facts, anecdotes, and descriptive segments. I think in this piece particularly with this common language, we might offer students a descriptive segment on something that they would see in nature, or perhaps a quote from somebody that participated in one of those activities. And then those pieces that you see lastly in that light blue area with the introduction and conclusion specifically relating to that. Now, after that kind of feedback using that common language, this is what we would be able to get to. We see this growth over time as a use of these skills. And once again, I'm going to step back and really think about some of the questions coming in terms of that growth and ability to provide that kind of feedback in a timely manner, students getting that very specific, actionable feedback that says, when we look at a lead, what is your lead and what technique did you use? And so before, we didn't really have a technique in the lead, but after conferring with the student, and even in an authors group revision model where we would talk to the entire class about that, notice here that an anecdote is now utilized because of that. It says, last summer, I went on a camping trip to the mountains and had more fun than you can imagine. We might also provide that feedback on that topic sentence to where you can go in the next one and see there's more specificity of main ideas versus things and stuff. So now we have this summer. I want you to go with me so that you can experience the fantastic scenery, the amazing food, and the entertaining activities. So that's adjectives as well. So we're looking at, and we won't read the whole piece, but we are looking at the organization of that. You can go down to the vocabulary and see how that's enhanced. You can see how the main reasons have been beefed up, which means that the elaboration, the supporting details will be soon to follow that.
Can I jump in for a second here, Jen? I want to just sort of address a couple of things. Susan, one of the things, and some of you may be, not sure about that as well. One of the things that we do that's really different at Empowering Writers is we really break the skills of writing down into their really manageable pieces. And what we're talking about, so what Jen's really been going through, and you see what the students are able to do, is because we've broken it down. We haven't just said to them, write a story or write an essay and then gone back inside and tried to conference and fix things. What we really do is we teach a very specific skill, and then we find evidence of that skill as they apply it. So in your classrooms, regardless of whether these are special education students or any of your other typical students, what you really want to make sure that you're doing is that you're teaching skills. If you're not teaching them specific skills and allowing them time to practice, and by teaching, I mean modeling and using language that they can really hook onto, and then giving them time to practice, what happens is they do struggle. And Jeannie, Science of Reading, thank you so much for that question. Anyone want to address that?
I will. So Jeannie, when we are considering the science of reading, we are really looking at how all of this fits together. One of the pieces that we've studied from that is really looking at the integration part of it and understanding that connection between how do students really think about responding to reading and their ability to generate that reading at the same time. And so the comprehension piece is what we are really trying to make connection with those writers' generative skills. In doing so, we go back to the research behind the science of reading, and writing is a part of that. It just means that we recognize what good authors do when that happens. And so they're more cognizant of that ability. They're more conscious of the moves that the authors are making, and they're able to respond to that text in a more informed way.
So I would like to address Tammy's question was, she said, I need help with kinder and first grade. Um, so one of the things that I just am going to encourage you to do, Tammy, because you said you didn't have any materials, is to get on our website and just look at that 2-week trial of the Hub guide, because really I think what you're going to see is we're going to teach writing in the kinder and first grade classrooms, and we're going to marry those with reading, because oftentimes what's our main focus in kindergarten and first grade? It's reading, but we really want to look at reading through the lens of writing, because that's really where we're going to pull those kids into a different level of reading when we bring in those writing strategies and skills. Plus, all the skills in the kinder and first grade guides are very foundational, and they also vertically align as they go through the grade levels. So they begin with those foundational level skills in kinder and first, and then those skills really deepen as they go through the subsequent grade levels. So I really think that's a great place for you to start, is to look at that 2-week trial. It doesn't cost you anything, and that way you can look at it and decide for yourself, is this something that will help my students? I know I'm a 26-year veteran in kinder and first grade, and it really meant everything to me when I began to look at these lessons and think about how they can connect with what my kids need and what my kids do. And when I looked at my samples, I thought, I'm basing everything they do in writing off of their habits and their journal writing. And really we want to move them. And I'm not saying take away journal writing, because that's one of those first steps. I'm saying along with that journal writing, where they write and they label those pictures and they begin to put their words down on a piece of paper, we also want to give them some fundamental skills and strategies of an author, such as the who, the where, and the what of a story, or the beginning, the middle, and the end of a narrative. And so we want to begin that conversation with them, even if it's just orally, besides just that journal writing.
Anybody else with questions?
So Lisa, I'll address the your small group of students in your reading intervention. I was also an interventionist. I spent a lot of years working with struggling writers in my position in the public school as a writing specialist. And a lot of things that I did, really, I took the exact same skill, what they were working on in their classrooms. And what I did is I broke it down even smaller. And as I broke it down, I did things like I gave them a smaller piece of paper. Sometimes it's sort of like a mental challenge for them. They look at that blank sheet, they can't do a thing. I always had sentence starters provided for them. And oftentimes those sentence starters were right there on their desk or on their table. It was not something they could take from the wall. So I put it right there. They had reference sheets, and those reference sheets were usually the menu items that we provide. So for instance, if you're in narrative and you're writing an entertaining beginning, the menu of entertaining beginning strategies was right there. And I would model with them one strategy. That's it. One at a time, they would practice one. Because what happens in terms of students who are struggling in terms of writing is that they need to develop just in small pieces. The other biggest strategy I used was orally. Everything I did started off as an oral exercise, and we did not move until the writing until they could express themselves orally in a way that was really effective.
And Diane, that's also true. All of the strategies that you just mentioned are also true in the ESL classes as well. So if you can narrow those pieces down and do smaller chunks, and then so they do a sentence on a sentence strip, and the next day they do another sentence, and then you put those together and they can see, hey, I created this paragraph. That's my paragraph, but you did it in such small chunks. It wasn't so overwhelming for them. So that's extremely important in an ESL classroom as well.
Kath, I'm just going to go ask you to advance to the next slide, because we're having some questions about how much time do you spend on narrative writing and when you're testing an expository. And here's what I'd like to do. And I think this really relates back to a lot of the questions we're getting about the foundational work, about the science of reading. I know we have a science of reading article, and I think, Jen, you probably just posted that link. I was just looking for it on our website. I think it's a worthwhile read. But let's just take a look at this, because this is really important. And this is important for a lot of reasons. It's important when we look at the aspect of what do our students need to know. And I'm going to tell you that when I was first in the classroom, I only had to teach one genre at the time. So whatever the genre was for the grade level that I was in, that's the genre that I taught. Well, as time progressed, what ended up happening is they started changing how we were going to assess kids and what they needed to know. And now all of a sudden we needed to know a lot more. And so what we really started to think about is, how do I get my students to become really proficient in narrative writing, proficient in informational writing, proficient in opinion writing? When I used to have a whole year to work on these genres, now I have to do them all in 1 year. And there's a couple of things that really came to mind when we started to kick it around. And here's what I want you to look at. This is a really important graphic. The center of this Venn diagram is really all about foundational work that's necessary for the foundations of literacy in both reading and writing. Students need to understand every single time they are in front of text what genre it is, how is it organized. I want them to understand the graphic organizer that is used to be able to create a narrative piece or an informational piece. I want them to know how to summarize the piece. Summary is going to be important for both pre-writing and for reading, so that I can read a piece and summarize it, or I can take a summarizing framework and use it as a jumping off point for writing. And the way in which I'm going to really become involved in that text is I'm going to learn how to annotate and analyze what authors do. So first we're going to do is we're going to look at text and we're going to deconstruct it for the purposes of reconstructing it. Now, oftentimes teachers will say, I use empowering writers, and for the first month or the first 5 weeks, we haven't written. All we're doing is looking at what authors do. And that's absolutely true. What you're doing is you're understanding the foundations of literacy. And this goes directly to the point that someone says, how much time do I spend on one genre when I have to be able, the kids have to generate the other? So here's the answer for that. When you look at it through this lens, what you're going to understand is the organizational framework, the graphic organizers, the summarizing, the annotation analysis for these types of writing. I'm going to have the same understanding for narrative as I am for informational. But that understanding is not going to be enough for me to be able to replicate that writing. That understanding is going to give me the ability to inform my reading, to inform my next step in writing. It'll give me a good foundation that I need. As I branch out in my understanding, I'm going to see the discrete skills that authors use to create an informational piece. The main ideas, elaboration, golden bricks, which is an empowering writer's word, which basically talks about the quality of those details. How do I bring it up to another level? Introductions and conclusions. On the narrative side, we have entertaining beginnings, elaborative details, suspense, main event, extended ending. Those are all discrete skills we teach our students. Now, what I want you to ask yourself is, what do my students need to know? What's my objective? If my students need to be able to generate an informational piece, then I'm going to actually teach them those discrete skills through that whole methodology. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to model those skills. We're going to go through guided practice and they're going to try it. They're going to learn how to generate those informational skills. But let's say that my students don't necessarily have to write a narrative, but they need to be aware of all the components. Then I'm going to talk about those skills, teach them those skills through the eyes of an author so that they can read with author's eyes. And that's what's really critical, is that they'll have the awareness level to be able to read narrative writing strategically, but they don't necessarily have to be able to write it. But they have to be able to look at it, they have to be able to analyze it, they have to be able to compare it. And all of that work is going to take place in that foundations of literacy. That is what brings us down to the ability to read with author's eyes. Eventually, what will happen is I'm going to go to the next step where those same exact knowledge of those skills are part of my revision process. I can now revise work because I recognize the skills that need to be in an informational piece are the skills that need to be part of a narrative piece. And all of that will play very actively into process writing. And all of this is equally as important to a foundational understanding for strategic reading. So when we say, where does reading come in to this? Where is the science of reading? It is embedded and we can't separate it. It is absolutely part of that knowledge base that Jennifer talked about. It is the vocabulary building. It is the understanding of what authors do that actually strengthens our readers. And that's why the work that we do initially is so critical. As we learn these skills, you're going to see what ends up happening is all of a sudden, as these tests change and people panic, because they always do. I've been doing this for 25 years with empowering writers working here. And every single time a test has changed, there has been a natural anxiety that comes with all teachers. I get it. I've lived through it personally in my own classrooms when the tests have changed and thought, oh no, now what do I need to do? And here's the beauty. If you do a really good job with the foundational work that we talk about, and you teach writing as a skill in discrete ways, what ends up happening when the tests change, your writing instruction doesn't change. What does change is that you make sure that your students are prepared for the assessment, whatever that is. So I always like to say I have two jobs as a teacher of writing. One is I teach my kids to write well and to read strategically. And the other part is I teach them how to address the assessment. That's an entirely different skill. But with all of this foundational work done, I can do a constructed response because you know what? That's all about understanding those discrete skills, right? That went into creating the piece to begin with. I'm going to become a better strategic reader because I know how it's put together. I can skim and scan. I can quickly summarize. I know what to look for. And any of those literary analysis tasks are going to be easy to check off the list when we can look at writing through this lens. And of course, that extended response will be part of when we talk about generative writing. So if my students know how to create an informational piece or how to write a narrative piece, and they know how to generate it, they're going to apply that skill to those particular tasks. Now, I know that was a lot. Any specific questions on that? When teachers ask us what's new with empowering writers, what are we going to be doing differently? What's new with empowering writers is that we're going to spend more of a time really looking at this literacy launch, whereas before, if you were teaching informational writing, you learned all the foundational work for informational. And if you taught narrative, you did that. Now what we want to do is that make sure that in that first initial interaction with empowering writers, that first month of school, that first 5 weeks, we're really looking at literacy as a whole. And why is that so important? Across content areas, every single time my kids are in front of text, they are now able to interact with it in a way they couldn't before. They will know the genre. They will understand the organization, which will help them to predict. They will understand what those summarizing frameworks are and how do they look at it and summarize it quickly. And they'll be able to look at it through the eyes of an author and annotate and analyze it. The one thing I think all of you are familiar with empowering writers, the one thing that we sort of simplified in this whole foundational process is those graphic organizers are chosen for you. We've created them. It's the narrative diamond, it's the expository informational pillar, it's the opinion pillar, it's the argument pillar. We've created those so that they're consistent throughout. Starts in kindergarten all the way up through 8th grade. Questions, comments? So Lisa has a comment for us. And I'm sorry, I have a message from Susan. Susan and I were chatting back and forth. So she asked a really good question that was directed just to me, but I do want to share it because I think we'll all benefit from it. She said, I love the annotation and analysis and using the organizers. she's struggling with the language and how I can guide them through the annotation of a text. So when we do that, and Di, she was asking if we know of a resource where she can watch lots of different teachers doing this activity. And I'm saying, Di, because I know we have you on several videos actually annotating a text with the camera over your shoulder and talking out loud with the language that we want kids to hear. Could you happen to remember, Di, exactly where those might be?
So they are located in the hub. And I don't know, and this might be an Art question. Art, if you have them located in the YouTube, on our YouTube channel, because there are some just that are out there on our YouTube channel. I want to say that the annotation and analysis ones where they're kind of right over my shoulder and I'm going through that will be definitely in the narrative hub guide, in the annotation lesson, which is section 1. That's for sure.
And actually, Susan, you're asking exactly the right question, because when we do annotation analysis, one of the reasons why we videotape it is because we want you to hear the language that takes place so that we can walk you right through it. And that's exactly what we do. So we model it first for you. We model that language, and then we want the kids to pick up on it. And also in all of our guides, there is the step-by-step for annotation and analysis in that first section of genre and organization. And that actually will guide you through what questions that you can ask. How do we move through that annotation process? So there's a step-by-step direction sheet that's available.
Lisa, do you want to unmute yourself and maybe have a little conversation with us? I'm trying to figure out sort of the best way to answer.
Yeah.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how to teach, because you had mentioned the sentence strips, and which I'm familiar with because I saw that wonderful video of yours. And I think what's hard is, years ago when I first found empowering writers, my principal gave me, carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. So I introduced it to the school. So I think at that point, I knew more about narrative than I did expository. And then I later learned expository. And it was wonderful. It was the first time that the kids ever passed a writing exam in the school for many years. So it was a great experience. And then now that was many years ago. And now I'm a reading interventionist teacher at a school. And, they use Lucy Calkins. They don't use, empowering writers. So because if they had empowering writers, then I could kind of hook onto it because they've heard the language in their classroom. They know. But when you're teaching a small group, they've just read a book and now they're doing writing. And mainly I just say, okay, write a sentence about the book. But knowing, the beauty of empowering writers and the richness, it's hard to know how to just start. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm making sense, but.
No, well, let me just I just want to piggyback on really what Day has been talking about. We're going to start as a reader, and that's the reality. So as we're reading books, as we're reading literature, as we're reading informational text, one of the most important things that we do at Empowering Writers is we model how to summarize that reading. So part of their constructed response is being able to summarize a piece of reading. So the two summarizing frameworks, the one for narrative, which is this is a story about the problem or experience problem was solved, experience ended. That's your basic summarizing framework. And it is in conjunction with the diamond. So you're familiar with the diamond? That summarizing framework is exactly what you need. And you match the areas of their reading right up to the diamond. So they start to be familiar with it, even just as an awareness level. Okay. On the other side, the pillar is the structure for informational. When they're reading information, they summarize information with their topic and their main ideas. And we provide in our informational guides some informative verbs, which help them to create a summary paragraph. So I feel like, Lisa, that might be such a great starting place for you, where if you can get those kids writing really good summaries, that might change some thinking in school.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And you know what, just to piggyback on that, Di, and Lisa, really for everybody, I think what's interesting about the conversation that you're having is you're actually saying it's harder to work with these kids because they don't have the language of empowering writers.
Right.
And that really
Yes.
speaks to what we talk about with that common language and those assured experiences, that it is much easier to move as a whole and to make some really significant gains when we're all speaking the same language. And so what's going to end up happening is you're going to be bringing in some of the language that they're not hearing on a regular basis. You
Right.
will make a difference with the students you work with. What we want to see is sustainable growth over time, and that is typically brought out by everyone speaking the same language. So those are the little stumbling blocks that happens, with any approach.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And our Jennifer Seaton just popped up one of our pieces up on our website, our 6 best lessons. And it's really important to just kind of take a look at those. Those of you who are not familiar with Empowering Risers, it's a free download. Go right ahead and download it. We have the 6 best K1 lessons out there too. So for our K1 teacher who's interested, those are also there for freebies. Okay, so make sure you go there and find those. It'll just give you a good taste of what we do.
And to the comment, do we have to create our own? In all of our resources, we make sure that you don't have to create your own, that we always give you a model for what this looks like, because you have enough to sort of move through initially when you're first learning it. We don't need you to go back and just have to create everything. So we give you the guidelines. Eventually what's going to happen is you're not going to need ours. You're going to come up with your own, and you're going to know how to do it when you start to really own the process. But initially we'll give it to you right up front. Any other questions? I see that we're up on our time already. That was really quick.
That's quick.
And I see that we have a question says, how do you organize students' work and resources? We are working through the process writing, and we have resource papers everywhere. Anybody want to take that? I'm only laughing because is that not every teacher's like, how do we do this? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, so I was going to address that. I was trying to scroll down to see who that was. So one of the things that I create at the beginning of the year, and I think most of us here at Empowering Writers have done the same, is that I create a writing folder or portfolio for every one of my students, so that as they keep up with all those process pieces through that writing portfolio. And it really also, through that portfolio, we really look at baseline to growth line. And so we can look at where were they at the beginning of the year, and now that we're at this process piece, where are they now? So they have to slide those in that portfolio themselves, so that I can take home the portfolios, but everything's in that neat little place. It's in their portfolio. So is that kind of what you were asking about? Because you do have process pieces and resource papers everywhere, especially if you have more than one class of writing.
Yes. I have 4th graders, and so we change from class to class. And so because of COVID, they have to carry their materials with them. And so there's like lots of sources and things. And so I was wondering if you guys had what type of folder do you use?
I do one with a pocket on it, so maybe like if you did a baseline at the beginning, that's stapled on the front of the portfolio. So that's always staring at them. Every time they put a piece in there, that very first piece without instruction is there for them to see. And what happens with that I love is that they will come to you and say, Miss Howell, look where I was at the beginning of the year. Look how awful I wrote, or something similar to that, because you don't even have to tell them. They see it, and it's there for them to see every time they put a new piece in their portfolio. So I like the ones with pockets instead of the ones that have the little brads, because what happens is they always break, and they bring you their folder and it's already broken. So I use and if you have several pieces in there and they have to travel from class to class, then I would use one of the little clips to put on it, so that at the top you have it clipped, so that as they're going from class to class, even if they dropped it, it doesn't spill out and it's everywhere. So one with a pocket, maybe a pocket on each side, and then you can clip that with just one of the little larger clips.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Everything's in one place for them. And
And I think we actually have writing folders on our website. Don't we sell them with, by genre? So we have them for informational that has have the pillar on it and sentence starters on it, and we have it for narrative as well. So that's another resource that you can tap into.
And they're called writing portfolios on the website as well. So,
Jeannie, schools in Ohio. It's not coming to mind, but we might want to research that out. We have a couple of other colleagues that are not on with us today. April Dykes is a regional sales manager. I know Art Jarella is on here. So maybe they might know more about some of the Ohio schools. I'm not always familiar with every school.
Any other questions that we can address?
And so, Jeannie, if you want to go to our website and put in an ask us question and ask that question about the Ohio schools, that way it'll be delivered right to your inbox from the person who will have the answer for you.
Okay, so I want to be sensitive to everybody's time. People are certainly welcome to unmute themselves or stay on. I do know that we're past our end time. We appreciate you coming. We love the opportunity to talk to you. And oftentimes our webinars are really built around questions that you ask, things that you might need clarification on. And these topics are often springboards to what we do next. We do have a webinar library of various topics we've been covering. So feel free to take a look at that. If anybody is new to Empowering Writers or is only familiar with the print guides and is not familiar with the hub resources, we do have a pretty expansive hub. The biggest difference about the hub is that it allows us to give you a lot of those digital assets so that you can watch modeled lessons, you can see teacher background. We can provide you with some PowerPoints that you can use to inform your instruction. We give you virtual field trips to help you build background knowledge on some of those articles that we have our students read for the purposes of annotation. And we have those articles also in there that have a recorded voice on them, so you can modify the instruction if you need to. There's a lot in the hub, and I neglected to ask at the very beginning if anybody was using the hub or if you were on a print resource. So I'm not sure if anybody needs any more information on that, but feel free to ask those questions. The rest of you who have come and joined us and you want to hop off, feel free. And anybody else wants to ask anything additional, you can unmute yourself and stay on. We love talking to you.